This week's shir is dedicated in memory of my father-in-law, Reb Menachem Reb Yehuda Zechrono Livracha, Menachem Manny Goldman, with whom I had an incredible relationship. He passed away in 2004, December 22nd, Asara B'Teves. And just a little bit about him. He was a Holocaust survivor, born in Tomaszów, Poland in 1928, survived the Holocaust, came to Israel in 1947, fought in the War of Independence. He eventually rose to the rank of Sgan Aluf. He was a lieutenant colonel, one of the first Israeli naval officers, and just an absolute giant of a man, of an example of a father. Just, there are no words to describe what a tremendous person this was. And his neshama should have an aliyah. He should be shepping much nachas in Olam HaEmes from his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. Baruch Hashem, he has two great-grandsons that bear his name. Our eldest grandson, Menachem Yitzchak Klein, and our grandson, our youngest grandchild, Nadav Menachem Rivlin. And they should be a true example of his greatness. His chus should be carried on through them. May his neshama have an aliyah. Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. Welcome to Jerry's Corona Contemplations for Parshiot Miketz and Vayigash. Didn't get in Miketz last week after Hanukkah and so on and so forth, but we will touch on both Parshiot today, as of course they are very much related. And of course we will start off with the beginning of Parshat Miketz, and that of course is about Paro's dream. So here we go. Yosef is in the dungeon. He's a slave. He was a foreigner, a convict, a Hebrew. He basically had nothing going for him. Yet he is brought to interpret the dream of none other than Pharaoh, the most powerful person in the world at the time. No question about it, as Egypt was the preeminent civilization, the first world, and here the Sar Hamashkim gives Paro the idea, Schata ayani maskir hayom, and he tells him the story, Visham itanu na'ar, he was young, Ivri, Eved, so that Paro wouldn't say to him, well, what have you been holding out on me for? But nonetheless, Paro says, let's do it. And after so many years in prison, like we said in our last shir, Hashem snaps his fingers, kaviyachol, and he goes from the lowest point to standing right next to the throne. So what is Yosef telling Paro? And it's very interesting. If you look, there's a little bit of a difference between what Paro says and what Yosef says. But Paro says he's standing by the river. And you'll notice, if you look at the psukim, that the river is repeated a few times, al sfat hayar, and the cows come out of the river, and the river, again with the water, like we were talking about the wells. But as we know, and even to this day, the Nile is the source of Egypt's economy. Definitely more so then, but the cities are built along the Nile River. So that's the thing Paro is telling Yosef. I'm standing by the river and from the river. So, and then he says, I told the Khartoumim, the magicians, they couldn't figure it out. One said he'd have 7 daughters and they would die, and one said he would conquer 7 nations and then they would conquer him back or lose it, whatever. But Yosef immediately said this has something to do with the economy. Yosef probably had an MBA. Well, actually he didn't. He was in prison the whole time. And he saw Paro also. He noticed that you had the good cows and the bad cows, and the fat weed and the skinny weed, and that the skinny cows ate up the fat ones. And then Paro puts in this interesting thing that you don't see in the actual dream. He says that you couldn't, umarehen rak habatchila, that you couldn't even notice. So Paro is telling Yosef that there's a good side and a bad side, and it's all coming together at one point, and it's somehow related to the economy. Of course, Paro isn't telling Yosef this, but this is what Yosef is hearing. And this is why none of the other interpretations work, because it was always how a good thing happened and then it was terrible. But Yosef comes and he says, well, here's what's going to happen, and he tells them about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And what's the difference? Yosef says, now here's how you solve the problem. He didn't just say, oh, Paro, there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? No, Yosef says, no, hang on a second. This is what you got to do here. You get a wise fellow to be like the economy minister or the FDA administrator, and you save, you're going to have all this extra surplus, so you got to save it, and da-da-da. And Paro says, oh, you see, this is different. This works. Because I could see that it's all around the river. There's an economic side to it. And Yosef isn't just giving me, an interpretation. He's giving me advice. And there's a very important life lesson here as well. It's like when someone's having trouble or someone's having a difficult time, it's good to empathize. It's important to empathize. But if you have some advice, share it. If you see the person isn't interested, then of course, lay off. But he didn't just offer an interpretation. He offered a solution. And that's how Yosef became viceroy, by offering a solution. Something else important in Parshat Miketz, and this is a lesson to Jews in Chutz La'aretz everywhere in the world. Here's Yosef. Now, granted, he did not have an early start, or rather an easy start in Egypt. He was sold as a slave, and then the Eshes Potiphar problem, and then the Sarah Mashkim, and the Sarah Ophim, and in jail. But after he became viceroy, and he married Osnat, he had 2 children. V'shem hasheni kara Ephraim, and the second one he called Ephraim, ki hifrani Elohim be'eretz anyi, because God has caused me to flourish, to become great, in the land of my anyi, the land of my suffering. Now, granted, he suffered. But here he is, the second most powerful person in the world, living in the lap of luxury. I mean, luxury that even Donald Trump can't imagine. What ancient Egypt, if you were at the top of the food chain, you were living in some serious luxury. But yet, Yosef said, Eretz Anyi, it is the land of my suffering, even if I'm suffering. And we see that the Mefarshim tell us that a pit in Eretz Yisrael full of snakes and scorpions is preferable to the throne of Egypt. And he's saying, no matter where I am, Libi Bamizrach, or in this case, I guess northeast, right? But my heart is in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't matter how wealthy I am, whether I've got a Mercedes, a Lexus, and a Maserati, or if I'm living in the lap of luxury in Nechvesvast where. You're still Eretz Anyi. And that's why Yosef was Yosef and why he was Yosef HaTzadik. Because even at his lowest point, when he was a slave and tempted by Eshet Potiphar, and even when he was the greatest, at the greatest apex of wealth, of power, he never forgot, Ich bin Ayid, and my home is in Eretz Yisrael. Probably one of the most emotionally charged, let's say, episodes of the Torah altogether is that moment when Yosef tells his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am your brother Yosef. Now imagine the shock. Imagine the shock. After everything they went through with Binyamin and the goblet and coming down and Shimon put in prison, and then they were apoplectic. They had no idea what was going on. And then when he said, Ani Yosef, Eureka. Everything made sense. And the Torah tells us, and the Gemara tells us, that after 120 years, after our lifetime here in this world, we are going to hear, Ani Hashem, I am God. And our eyes will open up. And all the suffering, even the good times, the bad times, why things happen, how they happen, COVID-19, 9/11, the Holocaust, everything will make sense. Now, we can't imagine that. We can't imagine it. But one of the themes that I try to work into each one of these little video talks that I do is the whole idea of V'ra'ita et achorai ufanai lo yera'u. We don't always, when you're in the midst, mima makim, karaticha Hashem. Esa einai el haharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Right? Even when we're in the most difficult parts of our lives, we have to remember, V'ra'ita et achorai ufanai lo yera'u. When you're looking straight at it, it doesn't make sense, it's painful. But very often in life, not even after 120, but very often in life you could look back and say, I see what you did there. And that was the whole purpose that the Torah brings us this episode. Teaches us. Remember, like I always say, the Torah doesn't waste real estate. Hashem only tells us in the Torah what we need to know. The Torah is very much on a need-to-know basis. What we need to know is in there. Whether it's direct or through Mefarshim, through study, through commentary, but it's all in there. And what we need to know is that Hashem's in control. Hashem's in control of everything. And when we look back on life very often, we'll see why things happened and how it was ultimately for our benefit. But most of it we're not even going to know in this world. Because most of what happens in our periphery, and we don't even see it happening. So much good is being done for us that we cannot even see. And after 120, when we hear Ani Hashem, we're going to get to see it. And we're going to realize how fortunate we are to have the gift of life and having Hashem guiding what we do, how we do it, and how we have to use our free choice, which is the greatest gift that God's given to us, to make the right choices. So, after all of this, Yosef tells his brothers, you're going to meet Paro now. And here's what you're going to tell him. You're going to tell him you're shepherds, right? Because shepherd, the sheep was a god, small g, in Egypt, and shepherds were not well looked upon. And they're probably like, hey, Joey, I mean, we don't all need to be shepherds. Some of us could be warriors. Maybe we could get into the government over here. And he's like, no. You're not doing any of that. You're doing exactly as I tell you. And now he's not little Joey. Now he's the viceroy of Egypt. He could snap his fingers and they realized that. So they said, okay, we'll tell them we're shepherds. And you're going to be in Goshen. Nice area, flatbushy, lakewoody, whatever. But we don't want you mixing with the Egyptians because we know how that ends and how it ultimately did end. Right? As soon as Yosef and the Shvatim died, they moved out to the suburbs and then started, however it was in 400, 200 years of slavery. Never good. But they listened and they were afraid. And it's very interesting that throughout the whole story of Yosef, you'll see that very often they ask him for forgiveness and he says, no, it wasn't you, it was Hashem. But what you don't hear him say is, I forgive you. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, we don't really know. But we're told from our Gedolim, from our Mefarshim, that part of the reason for all the suffering of the Jewish people throughout time was because of the sin of Yosef, by what they did to him. And yeah, he said it wasn't you, it was Hashem, you didn't do this, really, God did it. But he always had a little bit of, he was upset, rightfully so. And we realize how important, it's a lesson, of course, we realize how important true forgiveness is. Never walk around with a grudge. Terrible, terrible thing to do. It's like jealousy. Grudges and jealousy and bad feelings are poison, not for us, for the people that we feel badly against, and for the world. It's negative energy. It's terrible. So never hold on to bad feelings. Talk them out. But we see that harboring grudges lead to terrible consequences. Rabosai, as I always say, Shabbos hi makar habracha. Ein Yisrael negolan ela b'zchut haShabbos. Please don't roll on Shabbos. Enjoy Shabbos. Make a bracha. Say a kiddush, eat a challah. Time with the family. Divrei Torah Zmiris. Thank you for joining us. Join us back here, hopefully next week, from the other side of the ocean. And, Ruchi and I got vaccinated tonight. Yay! No more COVID, please God. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.